Let's see. In just a second, we're going to have start recording this session, and then Vince. Vince is our technical support on this call, so thank you for doing that. We are talking today about Student Affairs Assessment Leaders in Action, providing opportunities to build assessment, evaluation, and research competencies for student affairs staff. And I'm going to let each of the presenters introduce themselves as they talk about their own programs. I'm going to be hosting today, so what we've structured it is for each of them to share an initial overview of their program, the opportunities they provide to their staff for advancing their assessment skills in particular, and then we'll have some moderated discussion time. Please feel free to chat in at any point, and we'll come back to questions as we have them. Just another quick note. Our learning outcomes, we're really wanting you all as attendees here to be able to identify factors in developing the program so that you can think about how this would look on your own campus, and talk about advantages and disadvantages for the different models that are going to be presented here today. So thank you for that, and we'll start with Adam whenever you're ready.
Perfect, thank you so much. I just need to be able to share my screen. If you can make me the presenter.
Adam, you should see an option down in your menu now to share your screen.
Okay. All right, are you able to see?
Yep, we're good. Thank you.
Perfect. So my name is Adam Cebulski. I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Student Engagement and Success at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. Part of my role also is serving as the Chief of Staff for our Vice President for Student Affairs. So both assessment and staff development fall under me. So it's a great way to talk about how we have combined the two to help actually tailor competency development around the NASPA ACPA competencies within our division. And so when we think about how we do this on our campus, we very much separate the A, the E, and the R. And so we have different competency development programs if you're doing assessment, if you're doing evaluation, or if you're looking to conduct research. We recognize that they serve different purposes. And so we want to make sure that we are taking a holistic view as we approach that competency development. So initially, we had sort of a cookie-cutter approach where everyone was treated the same and we had the same staff development in each of those three areas based on just being a staff member in our division. It didn't matter which functional area you came from. We've since divided ourselves into 5 separate functional areas with multiple departments and offices underneath us, and we actually tailor our assessment, evaluation, and research competency development to the functional areas underneath those. We understand that residence life, for instance, would evaluate and assess differently than career development, who their populations are, what they have access to, and the type of learning that's happening in their different programs. So we treat these 5 functional areas very differently, and I'll talk about our consultation model that we have to help build capacity within each of those different areas. But currently, across our division, we require 10% of our staff to go through the assessment, evaluation, and research training. However, we have about 34% voluntarily participate in our program. And so what we initially had to do was a couple years ago, we created a strategic plan, but we realized that people didn't know how to assess progress toward completing a strategic plan. It's comprised of objectives and goals, learning domains, and then commitment statements. But what we realized was even when we identified metrics for these, we had a lot of developmental work to do in order to get people to understand what does it take to assess a learning domain so you're able to check off and say, yes, the student actually learned the outcomes related to that domain. Or when we're talking about a goal and objective, what is that success metric and how do I measure it when maybe it's not as concrete as, you know, increasing a certain percentage of students participating in the program, but it was a little bit softer in the way that it was phrased. And so our initial charge was really to train our division on the strategic plan, but more importantly, how to assess progress toward it and evaluate the effectiveness of the programs that are coming out of it. So as I go through this, you'll see that all of our assessment, evaluation, and research training tools are centered around the framework of this plan, because we wanted to make sure that they recognized it as part of their work and not something in addition to their work. So when we also think about that, all of what we're doing is focusing on the impact on students in particular and their learning and development. While we are looking at satisfaction and things like that, we are really more concerned with the impact-based or action-based research that our areas are doing. So we don't spend a lot of time just talking about artificial number or superficial descriptive statistics. We're really looking at the impact, however that might be measured in a particular program. So with our learning domains, one of the things that we've had to do with our staff is we were not a division who ever assessed learning. And so we really had to get people to understand that coming to a program doesn't imply that they actually learned something. There had to be some sort of metric of success that we were looking at. And so what we've done is we've taken the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor taxonomies and sort of modified them a bit so they all have 5 levels. So what we've trained our division to do is to recognize what learning happens in each of those 5 levels. So the easiest one that people really typically know is Bloom's taxonomy, and just the basic, sort of remembering, all the way up through creating new knowledge. And what we've really gotten them to think about is, what does your program hit at, ideally? And then that's sort of the basis of figuring out what rubric you're using or what types of assessment you're doing. What level are you hitting within a particular learning domain? And we know that all of our folks would love to say that everything hits all domains, but we know that programs typically specify or specialize in something. So once they're able to identify the max level of learning that can happen in the program, we start to identify what methods they're looking at. So for every program that we have, it's mapped to one of these particular learning domains. And then each individual staff member who's working on that is going to identify the level of learning that's happening. And so they're able to recognize that through the verbs that they're using, or sort of talking anecdotally about what they want out of that program. And then we teach them how to identify the appropriate assessment methodology. We were a division that loved surveys, and we had honestly about a 4% response rate for most of our things. And so they really had to think about it differently. We talked a lot about teaching people how to use observations as assessment tools, or how to look at portfolios or reflections. And so really highlighting some of the best practices that's not survey assessment. Because again, we're not as concerned about some of the surface level things. We're really looking at that impact. And so the training really focused on, not all of these can be measured in the same way. Some of them are behavioral, some of them are knowledge-based, some of them are skill building. And we really wanted them to create sort of laboratories in which they could observe the behavior. So we'd really try to get our folks to understand how to conduct direct assessment that is actually addressing the behavior that they're looking to develop or the knowledge they're looking for a student to gain. And sometimes that's longer term. So we've had to get people comfortable with the idea of, it's not always going to happen at the end of the program. You may have to wait and see about a behavior. So if we're talking about conduct, we may be more concerned about the recidivism than whether or not they could write the essay as part of the pathway or sanction after that event. And so really getting people to understand that assessment is not cookie cutter took us quite a bit of time. To do that, we have a 3-fold training process. So we have our own student affairs assessment cycle, which is based around a typical one, where you're really sort of investigating the learning, providing the programs, assessing them, and then ideally turning that assessment data into action. Each of our departments has a say in how that assessment is done. It's regularly reviewed. So we do an annual review of their constituent outcomes, their mission statements, their learning outcomes, and mapping everything again back to that strategic plan. And it feeds a 5-year plan that we had to do a lot of training around. For training and development, we do a hybrid model. We have live instruction. So we have about 20 hours of required live instruction where they're learning the basic concepts of assessment, they're learning some foundational methodology, and then they're able to customize based on the type of assessment that they're looking to do. What we started to realize is assessment contexts weren't changing year over year, so we added an online component where they can test out of something. So as they're able to demonstrate the competency knowledge through Canvas, they're able to test out of some of that live instruction and move on to maybe some more advanced things, or just not have to come to the live component. As part of that, each functional area is assigned a consultant who is part of our central assessment learning domain team, who will serve as an expert to help them, whether it's develop assessment, deploy them, market them, recruit people to participate. It's a way to really give them the hands-on attention, because on our campus, our assessment professional is a shop of one with 2 graduate assistants. And so it's bandwidth is definitely an issue that we have while trying to do some really high effort assessment. In addition to that, every summer we have what's called Pro Devo Week, and a full day of that is dedicated to assessment. And so the assessment contacts are required to go to that. Anyone else can voluntarily attend that, but it's a way to help develop and sort of hone in. So they're required to bring one of their major projects for the upcoming year, and they actually work through building that assessment methodology within it. As part of that system as well, every department on the right-hand side you'll see has a landing site within Canvas that will link them out to all of their different documentation. So all of their previous assessments, we use Weave for accreditation and all of the learning assessment that goes with that. And so they have a repository that's available to them. So as we have new assessment consultants, they're able to learn what they need to do. It's linked across all of our platforms as far as Box. So teaching them how to use previous data, that you don't have to do the same thing every year. So part of our training methodology is to talk about how do we phase in something.
Adam, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for just a second. The screen share the slides aren't advancing on the screen share. So we can't see what you're seeing. And I do have there we go. Thank you. Yep. Sorry about that.
So I'm specifically referring to that yellow box. So we teach them how to stage out their programs and their services. So over a 5-year period, their entire department is being assessed. So they have to make some decisions, and we teach them how to make decisions about prioritizing different things, as well as understanding, where do you have effort, and maybe we need to figure out when the high effort ones are and when the low effort ones are. This all feeds into a plan that we've had to teach them a lot about strategic planning and how them as units need to have their own strategic plan. So part of the training, this is what the training is built off of. So on the very left-hand side, I know it's probably a little hard to read, they have their constituent outcomes. So their online training really depends on them designing correct constituent outcomes and mapping those appropriately. The training then moves into identifying programs and services that fall into each of those buckets, as well as the type of assessment that they're looking for, whether it's learning or programmatic. So we stage the training so as they're going through, by the end of it, they're actually filling out this entire 5-year plan. And so it's helped them understand the process from start to finish and to know what's coming up, so they didn't feel overwhelmed in any given year. From the evaluation standpoint, this is something that we never did as a division, and so we've implemented CAS program review. So we are very intentional about how we review ourselves. Currently, we're in the middle of a 5-year cycle. With our folks, we really had to teach them about what is the process, and then how do we engage other people in that. So they all go through a training during the initial kickoff of CAS. So not only do they learn what CAS is, but they learn about how to measure evidence against criteria to make sure that the ratings are as accurate as possible. Part of this is we always have somebody on the committee who's done CAS before, and then we make sure that other folks are learning so they can later serve on other internal review teams. We also teach them, once we get the external reviewers on campus and provide their final report, we teach them how to synthesize the 2 reports and how to make meaningful actions and insights out of those. So they are required to provide evidence-based decisions for why they might reject or accept a claim, and then provide an action plan for it. So again, that's all feeding back into that 5-year plan. If you're accepting something, how does it relate back to your constituent outcomes? How would you then assess it? And so we're tying that evaluation back to the assessment methodology that they're using from their general assessment reports. So here's just an example of some of the offices that have gone through recently and the campuses that we've brought as our external reviewers. As part of our evaluation in our strategic plan, we require them to sunset or revamp at least one program or service every year. Their low-hanging fruit, so to speak, or their worst performer. So that is where we've really had to teach people about what does success look like, and you've got to define that up front. And then that is what's going to tailor your assessment to be able to objectively say, this program is not succeeding, or we're not reaching where we want to. And so at the end of the year, they're required to report to all of campus, actually, what programs they've sunsetted and revamped. As part of that, they've got to provide evidence for why, however they're redeploying those funds, that staff time, that student experience, why that will be a better use of those resources. So everything that we're doing is very data-based, and they've got to be able to explain that. And that's all part of that coursework that they're doing to understand what is the language I should be using, what are appropriate methods, and then what does this mean? And then as part of our strategic plan, we've been very clear about wanting to make research a priority. So we have two different levels of research. We have staff research and student research, and actually they influence each other. So we have a couple different student research teams where we actually encourage staff to teach undergraduate students how to conduct research. So they themselves actually have to learn how to do it first. And so we have a research team in student affairs that basically we have a suggestion box that when there are comments or questions that come up in different division meetings or staff meetings, they're able to submit those as saying, hey, we should research why that's happening, or this is a trend, what should we do? So we use those current issues as the foundation for designing research questions and studies for our staff and our students. And so you'll see here on the left-hand side, these are the questions that we're addressing this year. But this is our opportunity, since many of our staff didn't necessarily have a pure research methodology course in graduate school, we teach them how to conduct research. And then eventually the goal is always to present or publish. And so they get a crash course on not only conducting that research, but how to write for publication, and then how to create presentations. And so we really focus, again, on how can that relate back to the work you're doing as a division, and how does all of this come together? So that's sort of an overview of some of the programs we use to address those. As people are going through this, they're actually being evaluated against the NASPA ACPA competency rubrics to understand where they fall on those different levels, so that they can get a better idea of what they're supposed to be doing. Obviously, we have higher expectations for the individuals who are the assessment contacts, but then anyone is welcome to participate in the programs as well. And then once they're doing all of that, we teach them how to present that publicly, because collecting information is a lot different than sharing it, and sharing it appropriately. So we have an impact forum where Student Affairs presents to campus every summer, telling the campus community, faculty, staff, and students about how we impact campus and the benefits that we provide. So that's sort of an overview of what we do on our campus to develop our staff, and then the expectations we have for what they do with that data once they have it.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing, Adam. And we're going to switch to Lucas now and go ahead and share, and then we'll have more of a discussion and themes across them when they're done.
Great. Can you see the correct screen now?
Yes.
Wonderful. So my name is Lucas Schalewski. I'm the Associate Director within Assessment and Research, and our office supports all the different student services and student affairs departments on campus. So a little bit more context that we want to provide as it relates to developing the assessment evaluation research competencies. We're pretty decentralized, so it's really hard for us to have clear expectations because a lot of our different student affairs areas have their own individual assistant vice president or assistant vice provost. So that's certainly a challenge we have when we're thinking about these professional development opportunities. We are largely focused within our assessment, evaluation, and research on student success and retention outcomes. This is predominantly because of our strategic plan and our Arizona Florida regions. So often we're trying to find opportunities to really interject assessment that is geared towards student learning, and that's something we're looking to move forward in the future and embed it as a part of our own offerings. And we do have KPIs, or key performance indicators, as a part of our strategic plan overall as an institution. So we definitely hone in on the quantifiable outcomes that our leadership is asking for different departments to achieve. And we do have a culture of scholarly practitioners. So a lot of our professional development currently isn't focused on research competencies. Part of that reason, I think, is we have a PhD higher education program here and a lot of folks who have PhDs. So there are informal groups that happen on campus naturally, but there are some new initiatives trying to make that more systematic instead of informal. So the professional development model.
Lucas,
yeah.
It looks like we're having the same issue where the screen share slides are not advancing.
Well,
So
here,
we needed to test
there
that
we
a little
go.
bit better. Yes, thank you.
And the professional development model we want to focus on is the Assessment Institute. The Assessment Institute happened in 2016, and it consists of 12 different staff members on campus, and this is a photo of the first cohort in 2016. And this curriculum was developed by a team of student affairs staff back then, and it was informed by the AER Competencies. I believe this was the different version, as now, hence there's been a new one that's been put out. We don't have the different modules and learning outcomes labeled within the competencies, partly because not everyone on campus relates to that model. So therefore, it's a little bit more documented behind the scenes. There is an application process that we require staff to complete. It's very simple, but we really want to make sure staff members who are typically younger or in their mid-level positions are having conversations with their department supervisor to ensure that they are going to be supported throughout that process. We also want to have a conversation take place as a part of this application to ensure there is an assessment need within the department, and that need can vary across the board. But we want to have that in mind so that this time spent of their staff time is going to be valuable for the department overall. So there's two parts to the Assessment Institute. The first part includes 8 different modules. They are listed on the screen here, and we have 2 instructors per module. We find that staff participants often really prefer and want to hear from different perspectives. So that kind of meets that expectation. And these last 2 hours a week, and then there is a written expectation that supervisors again support that there is an additional 1 hour per week outside that kind of in-class time, where sometimes we'll have some type of preparation or homework that comes after the module to kind of further apply that content. And then in the spring semester, after they complete the 8 modules, there's an assessment capstone project. So that's going to be developed as a part of the modules in terms of a plan, and then they're assigned with an assessment coach, which is a full-time assessment professional, or it's someone who is engaging assessment but not doing that as a part of their full-time job. I thought this slide would be informative for this conversation. As you can see here, we did have different curriculum in 2016 and 2017 academic year. We did take a year break because, similar to what Adam mentioned, we have a smaller department back then, and we just didn't have the bandwidth to support all these assessment projects that were happening in the spring semester as a part of their capstone project. They often were pretty comprehensive, and dividing that up among 2 people in terms of 5 or 6 individual staff members on top of our other responsibilities was just too much. We do have more staff on campus, so now we're able to offer this program in 2019-20 after taking that break. But the arrows kind of note some of the changes that took place. I think what's notable is, based on feedback from the staff participants that occurred in the prior 2 years, we heard they really want this fundamentals session that was really focused on data literacy, how do you extract data from the data warehouse, and how do you kind of work with different departments on campus, such as institutional research or business intelligence, information technology, when it has connections within assessment and the use of data. We also added our session on culturally responsive, decolonized, and socially just assessment that reflects some of the trends that are happening in the field. We decided to have our own module, partly because we wanted the in-depth conversations while also hinting on it throughout the other 7 modules. We did kind of condense down the qualitative and quantitative methods. I think we want to get away from the binary and really help provide the methodology on that continuum from quant, qual, and everything in between. Some quick feedback. Time and time again, we do hear the general overview that higher level conversation regarding assessment in terms of the competencies tends to be preferred. That's what staff are finding is most helpful within their own assessment projects and when they bring that knowledge back to their department. And we also hear and provide some strategies to make sure the delivery of the content is informative to their learning. So we always want to provide the hands-on experience, learning opportunities, as well as the content that we share. And they're often looking for tangible examples of how various theoretical descriptions of the use of assessment has been applied at UA and other campuses. So part 2, the assessment capstone project. So we asked them to develop an assessment plan that is based on whatever need that themselves and their department supervisor have decided is going to be most helpful for that academic year. And then throughout that plan's development, we do have the assessment coach assigned within December. And then January through May is actually when the assessment project takes place. Often that assessment project doesn't complete by May 2020. It does sometimes bleed into the following summer and the following fall semester, especially for those that are looking at retention outcomes. We just have to wait until those data are available. So some evaluations do take place. We just completed after part 1, the 8-module program assessment, kind of looking at some of the indirect and a little bit of the direct measures of learning that took place. And then we'll have a showcase day where Assessment Institute participants will come with their supervisors, and various leadership members will be attending as well. 3 to 5 slides really showcasing the different assessment projects that are taking place, from the assessment plan itself, the outcome, preliminary results, and hopefully some folks are already using the findings. And then there'll be some embedded facilitated feedback and reflection that will take place between the assessment coaches and the Assessment Institute participants. And that's it for me.
Rob, I don't think we hear you yet. You should be unmuted on our end.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. What a relief. And let me make sure I'm sharing. And are you seeing the presenter view or the real slide deck?
Right now we're seeing your Zoom meeting, so the internet browser.
Terribly sorry. Let me try this again.
And as Rob's getting set up too, I want the audience, to start thinking about questions you have for the presenters. I've got a couple of questions that we can ask, but also really want to know what you all want to focus on in our discussion time.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you seeing
Yes,
slides flying across the screen?
Yes.
I apologize, folks. Hi. Okay, there. Sorry about that. I'm Rob Aaron. I am Executive Director of Assessment and Planning at Northwestern University, just outside of Chicago. I'll take a few minutes to talk about the evolution of our student learning working group that we've had at Northwestern for a number of years. First, just very briefly to give you context of our Division of Student Affairs, we support about 25 different departments across the division. We spend the majority of our time in this big assessment bubble here in the middle. The research is really when we are digging into deeper assessment and research methods and participating in large studies and maybe doing some more complex analyses. And I'll talk about an assessment and research group that's growing out of that as kind of our step 2 for professional development. Where I'll spend most of my time in the next couple of minutes is talking about what has been called the Student Learning Working Group, which is embedded into our 60% assessment bubble. And it's really where we're increasing staff capacity for assessment, very similar to my 2 colleagues on this presentation. There was a need for starting this several years ago, and the culture's built up a little bit over time. And so I'll also be talking about where things are evolving and where we may see things going in the future. Moving on from here, we do have a 20% decision support bubble that's fairly new. The office a few years ago went from student affairs assessment to student affairs assessment and planning. So we're trying to be intentional about connecting all the dots across different departments And another aspect of building up the assessment capacity really helps inform that whole process. You know, as many of you, I'm sure on this call will often get questions of folks saying, well, you're in the data, you tell me what decisions we should make. And I will usually respond by saying, well, I'm happy to share with you my opinions, but I think the opinion is going to be better informed by the actual practitioners who work in the residence halls or who work at our student union or whatever the department is that it might be that we're referring to. So we like to try to look at where these three bubbles overlap, and then are we developing the assessment capacity to be able to facilitate some of that overlap? Elizabeth, am I advancing slides appropriately? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Very briefly, I'm not going to read our vision and mission. These have been around since 2011. So they've been around for a good long time. The one thing I do want to emphasize is in the lower left corner, we have 5 major strategic priorities. One of them is furthering student learning. And it's just to drive home the fact that cultures of evidence among student affairs staff, as I'm sure many of you know, need to be supported to the top of the organization. And we've been very fortunate to have this as one of our main strategic priorities for several years. I'm convinced that that has provided a really strong foundation on which we're able to build this capacity over time. When the Student Learning Working Group started to meet, which was in 2013, and I will cover that history in a moment, one of their major tasks was to develop a set of learning outcomes that the entire Division of Student Affairs can use. And this doesn't matter if you are more of an operational unit or one that is really looking at the student development kinds of issues. We look for opportunities for learning wherever possible. Now, we're not forcing learning. There are some shops that simply are providing services, and let's acknowledge that as it is, services, or they're managing operations or whatever it may be. There may be learning opportunities with student employees in those shops, so we try to see where can we map any of these learning opportunities, regardless of the department, to one or more of these learning outcomes. I think Adam mentioned earlier that, you know, we want to map everything to all the learning outcomes, but, you know, we do have to help people narrow that down to an appropriate level. So this has served us well in that they are broad enough, but we have very detailed learning outcomes for every department that are actually on our website. If you wanted to Google our site, you'll see a PDF that pops up that has the latest learning outcome list there, and they've been around for several years. The evolution of our professional development, I mentioned that this office, I believe I mentioned this office was founded in 2008 with a half-time person who was a retired associate vice president, and she founded our department. And that's when they really started devoting some energy around the assessment culture. She became full-time in 2011 and eventually established this Student Learning Working Group that I mentioned in 2013. Every year we have an assessment conference. It is just for our staff. That's the main audience. We invite some of our friends from around the university. We occasionally have an outside guest speaker, but the purpose is to showcase the assessment projects that were developed as a result of participants in our Student Learning Working Group, which essentially functions as a class in the fall quarter of every year. As our assessment culture expanded a little bit, we hired we had an opportunity to expand to have 2 FTE in 2015. A few years later, we established what's now called the Student Affairs Assessment and Research Group. This is the group for which you need to have completed the main Student Learning Working Group as a prerequisite, and it's where we are delving much deeper into the research-based technologies and going deeper into statistics and going deeper into qualitative analysis as well. Again, it was kind of a result of a need for expansion. Over time, we had about 19-20% of our division that had been through the program. Now, that may seem low on first blush, but if you think about the amount of folks that leave a division of student affairs on a regular basis and the new folks coming in, of the staff who remained since 2013, we had a good 20% group that had been through it before. We wanted to figure out how do we keep providing professional development for those folks, but also onboarding new folks or folks that just simply hadn't had assessment experience before. So it's been an exciting opportunity to be able to expand that a little bit. We're still kind of in the beginning stages of that. We were able to hire a third staff member in 2017 who is really our data scientist. And that has truly expanded the way that we're able to analyze different sets of data, but also really support the folks that are in the student learning working group in a way that allows them to be able to really inform what decisions are being made on the data so that our team can be the ones actually analyzing the results in a detailed way. We try to share it best we can. We hope that, in the future we'll be, what we're doing now, ironically, is kind of reaching back more into operations and program evaluation. I think several years ago we had a dearth of assessing student learning, which is when we created the student learning outcomes. Now we're at a point where, I don't want to say we're saturated, but we have a decent culture of assessing student learning, and it's time for us to really figure out how do we connect the operations and program evaluation kinds of work that we can do, especially now with much more sophisticated technology. How do we have these things talk to each other? How do we inform decision support more as a community instead of just among the top leaders who are in our division? So very briefly, I think I've mentioned the purpose a couple of times. I will skip over this for now. Our participants in student learning working groups, something I wanted to highlight for you all, we don't have degree requirements for folks coming in, and we acknowledge the fact that we've got some colleagues with PhDs. We have others who are working on a bachelor's degree or working on a master's degree. We want anyone who is interested in conducting assessment to be able to join us to learn about this as best they can, as long as they're a part of our division, with a few minor exceptions for partners around the university who will invite in anyone who's eligible to join. We do ask that our graduate assistants participate with a full-time staff member. As you can imagine, our grad students will graduate from the university, and it's always right before our assessment conference in the summer. And so we want to make sure that the program can be shared appropriately at the conference. And also, as important, that the program that that person has worked on during the year is planted as a seed in that department and can grow over time after they leave. So we try to connect any grad assistants who are interested with a full-time staff member to go through that program. And the program looks like this. It's about 8 weeks during the fall quarter. We're on a quarter system where each quarter is 10 weeks long. And you can see that we cover things from writing research questions to crafting learning outcomes. We spend quite a bit of time on data collection, a little bit of time on data analysis, because like I said, we drive a lot of the kind of intro level analyses for our colleagues. But then we do spend time at the end on reporting and sharing out the data and using for improvement. Ultimately, everyone who participates in this will present at our conference in the summer. And so we support them through the winter and spring quarters with data collection and analysis. And then we have practice sessions. We bring everybody back a few times during the rest of the academic year so that they can practice their session and feel really solid moving forward into the summer for our conference. The assessment and research group, that's fairly new. This will be our second time running this. This time we're going to run it in our winter quarter. And this is where we're able to dig a little deeper into the methods and help them learn how we do the analyses and have them on board with us, conducting analysis wherever appropriate. We help them find out different publication outlets. We've got a couple of different folks that we'll work with around the university that will just give a talk about how do we look for different ways to share the work via publications. And what we're thinking of doing this spring is setting up some parallel play time, and this is something that we use with children who might just want to get together and sit in the room and play at the same time, not necessarily with each other, but at the same time. And I don't mean to belittle the work that we do, but sometimes you just need someone else in the room that's working on a big research project. We are trying to create a space where people can say, okay, if I do nothing else on my research this quarter, I know I'll have 90 minutes every Thursday afternoon to go to Rob's office to the conference room and sit there and work on this project. And I'm available, my other two colleagues are available to answer any questions that might come up during that time. We're trying it. We'll see how it goes. I'll let you know. I don't know yet. It's something we're working on. Very briefly, conference half day in June. It's always the Tuesday after commencement. It's kind of a way that we wrap up the academic year. We've got 30 concurrent sessions, which is comprised by the current cohort members of the Student Learning Working Group. And then poster sessions are updates from alumni, if you will, of student learning working groups so that we can see where some of the seeds that were planted have grown over time. And it's been interesting to see the next few slides, just you can see a brief overview of some of the programs that we've had. We try to group things by topic wherever possible. This is all on our website as well. And we've got a history up there of the prior conferences too. Just, you know, it's a nice variety of things. This year we will have a couple of programs that are not just specific to learning. We'll have a couple of operational kinds of evaluations and program evaluation pieces as well. This is the second concurrent block of sessions. I know that we'll be sharing our slides with you all later on. I want to get us to our discussion time pretty quickly here, so if I seem to be rushing, that's why. This is an example of the different posters that we have. So again, these are the ones that are kind of more ongoing projects over time. Some years we've got 15 to 17 posters. This past year we only had a handful. Really depends on what kinds of assessment projects are going on. The way that we will share these is really through annual reports. It's a component of the annual report to talk about how would you describe effectiveness for your department. So our folks often use their department's learning projects for the year as evidence for program effectiveness of their department. Like I mentioned before, it's forming a foundation for some presentations that folks are working on for national conferences. I know that we've recently had folks at National Orientation Directors. We have folks from our Career Center that are presenting on a regular basis based on a lot of the projects that they've worked on. And our next hope is that it will become manuscripts for publications in journals. We're getting there, like I said, and I think that the more that we work together to really provide a space for this work to happen, I think it's an exciting time for the field to see where this stuff grows. So that's what I would want to share from Northwestern today.
Great, thank you again, all three of you, and I'm going to unmute all three of you as we have our panel discussion. One of the questions, so I think kind of seeing you, the three of you, talk about this and how very different the structure can be, as well as I was thinking about if somebody was going to develop this on their campus, thinking about staff selection and how you choose that and how you get buy-in from supervisors and leadership to make sure the staff have that time. What kind of product, that was one of the terms one of you used in our preparation meeting, what kind of product are you looking for the participants to share out afterwards, as well as just all sorts of different factors. One of the specific questions, and this is a little bit different than what we had talked about, but if one or more of you want to share specifically about how you evaluate staff, or if you evaluate staff afterwards, and what their competencies are, how you do that, and then how that does or may be separate from how you evaluate your program, and use that to inform changes in the program. All of you talked about how that's evolved over time. So there's kind of this dual component of evaluating the staff person and then evaluating your delivery of the program. And whoever wants to go first.
I can start with that. So we have a twofold evaluation process. We run a typical course evaluation like you normally would for any sort of learning experience. So there's a formal assessment. We do both an online version, and then there's a facilitated discussion at the end of an experience to gauge whether or not people felt like it was mostly a valuable use of their time, and if they felt like they were better at assessment, evaluation, or research, depending on the program, at the end of it. We also have a basic skill level. Because they're turning in assignments every week, they are graded, and therefore we understand if they're actually developing the program, so we have that as well. We also evaluate them. We treat it like this would be a committee membership. Committee memberships are part of our performance evaluation process. So for everything that you sit on, your committee chairs, in this case, it would be the assessment director. She evaluates everyone going through. And so part of her role is to look at how are they performing? Are they giving the effort? It's not something where somebody can just not turn something in. That becomes part of their performance record, and obviously that plays into merit increases and different opportunities they may have available to them. But we take it very seriously, and it's part of somebody's role. It's not just something they signed up for and can sort of back out of if they need to. Oftentimes, they are shouldering that responsibility for their department, and we want them to understand that if they don't perform, then their department isn't represented in our impact forum, in all of our annual reporting, and that has consequences for that area.
I would say that at our shop, we have a similar kind of process. I don't think that we have a formal connection to performance evaluation. We do, however, we acknowledge that if you join Student Learning Working Group in the fall, the commitment is going through the whole program and then participating in the conference in the summer. It is one of a series of events where the entire division comes together to really understand the different kinds of work that's happening across the departments. Since furthering student learning is one of our main divisional goals, it's something that folks hold in high importance. This year, we are connecting our conference with our annual award ceremony at the end. It's just one is happening after the other. I think that we do involve supervisors at the beginning of Student Learning Working Group, just to make sure that the participants are supported by their supervisors, make sure that everyone's getting the support from our office on a regular basis. And so, there are avenues for those supervisors to be discussing the participation in the conference with folks as part of their annual review. Those avenues are there. I do believe that folks make quite a few connections. We have evaluations of the program for the participants who have been through Student Learning Working Group, but then it is part of my office's annual evaluation where we will seek feedback from our colleagues by way of a survey or just by way of other, just other discussions that we're having to seek feedback on a regular basis. It's very important to us to, that's really some of the way that we've been evolving the program over time is based on feedback and a couple of focus groups that we've had with alumni of, okay, what's our next step? Are folks getting a little bit bored of Student Learning Working Group, or is there something else that we can do to keep people engaged in this process? That's eventually how we got to the research end of things for our group. And I think that knowing that folks have demands on their time, we didn't want that to be the reason for why they didn't join. So we said, well, let's carve out just a little bit of time where we basically have an open house in our office and come and hang out with us. It's like having office hours if you're a faculty member working with students. And it's interesting because more recently I've had several colleagues call me Professor Rob and things like that, which is kind of funny, but it's kind of this context of, we're helping them in this learning environment. For a lot of folks, they've not been in the classroom in 20 or more years. Others are right out of school. Others are still in school. It's for some, it's taking folks back to their academic roots. For others, they've never taken some of these kinds of analyses classes before. It's an interesting opportunity. I'm going a little bit off topic, but connecting it back to evaluation, again, it's something that I think is kind of woven into the process.
Well, and I think I'll just share, on our campus, we switched our survey software tool last like a year and a half ago now, and it's extensively more advanced if you want it to be. And so we're actually kind of doing something similar of just having come and explore together rather than me trying to share every single feature that's possible. Let's explore it together, play together in it, and I think I'm trying to figure out how do we evaluate how that works and whether it's fun for me because I learn new things even about the tool. But yeah, it's interesting kind of how that looks and what does the evaluation of that look like?
That's a great idea.
Lucas, did you want to share anything specific about the evaluation? Add anything?
No, I think the one thing I'll quickly say is it's a struggle for us to assess the assessment capstone project. That's something we're constantly trying to think through because the projects themselves vary so much from maybe a needs assessment to a really robust, predictive outcome research project. So that's something we're still working through.
Can I add one more thing that I forgot, that something Lucas said? I don't know why it reminded me that in our conference, it's not necessarily a secret shopper kind of thing, but we do make sure that we have alumni of Student Learning Working Group that are helping with some of the logistics, like handing out programs at the beginning and doing head counts in the different rooms. And we buy them lunch about a week after the conference and just process, how do things go? How did folks do in their presentations? What kinds of feedback can we provide them? I totally forgot about this process, but it just a moment ago. But it's been very helpful to get some of our colleagues that have had more assessment experience, because naturally, you know, we build the relationship with the folks in Student Learning Working Group, then they keep coming back and working with us throughout the following years. So those are the folks that we tend to have helping us run the conference, and they're, you know, giving us information on how things went. So it's another way to learn, you know, how is the assessment capacity being rolled out at the conference, and what kinds of feedback can we give to those participants. It's been handy.
This is another question that's a little bit off script. I apologize for doing this, but you all have talked about the evolution of your program over time, and how like the needs of the division have evolved with like whether you need to focus on student learning, and kind of what how that ties to the strategic plan. So knowing that it's going to change over time, it's going to look different on different campuses. Is there any like one thing that you wish you had known ahead of time that you want like advice to give to people who might be just starting out with this, of something that they need to be thinking about, or make sure that that's part of their planning?
I think, go ahead.
I think for UA's perspective, one thing that I wish we would have learned that we started to implement later was having some clear-cut milestones in place, right? So you kind of scaffold this professional development opportunity out, where if there's some expectation to do a delivery or a product, there's steps along that way where there's clear check-ins on specific dates where you receive something, provide the feedback, right, which is critical to the learning experience, so they can move forward in that process. Otherwise, if you don't have those milestones until you finally get this big assessment capstone project, you might not get the pre-work done that needs to happen to be successful.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. One of the things that I've learned, not necessarily on this campus, but having worked with multiple campuses, is you've got to gauge your campus's willingness to adopt and how much they're willing to adopt at once. Many campuses I've been at, they would rather have things phased in. And so they wanted one expectation, and then you could slightly add to it the next year and build up. The campus I'm currently at, they wanted the Band-Aid approach. They didn't want to have it change every year. They wanted just rip it off. What is the end goal that you want? And they wanted to understand that big picture, knowing that maybe year one's not going to be perfect, but they wanted to try to attempt all of it instead of feeling like everything was added each year. They just said, let's just go all in. And so we went that route. And there were definitely bumps along the way in capacity building that had to happen. But for our campus, they wanted the all-in route as opposed to the gradual build, because they didn't want to anticipate something being added to their plate, so to speak, every year until we got to where we wanted. They just wanted to know what was going to be expected of me down the road, and let's just try for that.
I think for us, the main thing I would share is that we had to kind of get over trying to create something new that's perfect. And that's not easy to do at many of our institutions. I think that we have a culture where we have a very competitive group of students, and I think we are often trying to make sure that we are doing perfect work, because our student culture is wired that way in many ways. And we've been trying to carve out this space as, you know what, research is messy, and yet it's really important to the work that we do. So let's see how this sets up. That's why I've been very transparent about saying today, especially, we're in process on developing this research group. I think it's going to work okay. I'm confident that we'll get some traction on it. But, you know, if over the next year or two we need to go in a different direction, we're going to be flexible to do that. It's taken some courage, though, to bring others along with me and just realize, hey, this isn't perfect. Let's see what happens. It's a little against what we normally do. And that's been kind of fun.
Yeah, having that intentional room to grow.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting thinking about, for me, thinking about the culture not only of assessment, but also just kind of personalities and capacity and that type of thing as you're planning this, and how that all goes into the structure and the participation and that type of thing.
Sure.
Let's see, and we haven't had other people chat in questions yet. So I'm trying to think of what other, I think one of the questions I'm curious about, because this has come up on our campus, so that we as a division particularly use the NASPA ACPA professional competencies, but also recognize that specific functional areas may have their own competencies. Have any of you thought about or looked at the assessment portion of other competencies, other organizations' competencies?
So we've done that. We have areas that are represented by NERSA, by faith-based organizations, by business ones. We've actually conducted a mapping process. So we will take every other competency that somebody wants to present as their field's gold standard and map it out so that if they want to use tools available from that professional association, like a rubric, that it would actually map onto the NASPA ACPA competency ones, so that at the end of the day, it looks like we're comparing apples to apples and we're not dealing with having multiple levels or multiple dimensions or frameworks. So as somebody presents a new one, we'll go ahead and map it and they can use it for their evaluative purposes. But at the end of the day, the language that we speak externally is all NASPA ACPA competencies.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of mapping things, because we do have so many different associations represented in student affairs that, why not link things together? I think that's a really effective way to do it. I'm just remembering that just yesterday I was meeting with members of our health service who go through their own accrediting process on a regular basis. And, as folks can imagine, if you also have a health-related department within your division, that the folks in that area can often lead our assessment efforts, in that they have this externally imposed accrediting process that they go through, and it's very rigorous. We have longitudinal data going back to 1996, I think, on our customer satisfaction survey. I mean, it's amazing, and so that's been a very effective tool for us to really be looking at the health related fields as kind of a model for the way that they're collecting data and some of the linking that they're doing to standards.
And Abby, did you have a question you wanted to, you typed in a question, I can ask that verbally, but if you want to share yourself.
Hey y'all, thank you so much everyone for sharing. I'm Abby Langham from Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. This has been so interesting to hear different ways that you all are doing this. We have a 3-tier curriculum that we launched about the same time that many of you did, probably around 2016, that each tier builds upon itself every year, and we've had great participation in that. And so as we're now in our 4th year or so of that, looking to see what's next. And so it's been really interesting to hear what you all are doing. And I had takeaways from all of you, but I know we're short on time. Can you share a little bit more about the Impact Forum and the Sunset and Revamp, and just what that entails a little bit more?
Yeah, so those are sort of 2 different things for us. So one of the objectives that's laid out is annually, each functional area that's down to the office level has to identify their lowest performing program or service and then provide evidence that they've sunsetted or revamped it. So one of the challenges we had in the very beginning was everyone had to identify every program, service, or opportunity they provided and the target level of success, whether that was a participant number, a head count, a ROI, some level of learning. And so they know in advance of that program happening whether or not they have a measurement of success. They go through and they assess it. And then their lowest one, by evidence of the data, they have to say and provide documentation for how they've either just gotten rid of it and redeployed those resources, or revamped it in a way and provided the plan for how they're going to reassess it the next year to show that they've fixed it. That's one component of what's presented in our Impact Forum. So our Impact Forum sounds a lot like the other schools. It's one day at the beginning of the summer where in the morning it's a research presentation. So we have a poster session with all of our different assessment contacts and their signature assessments that they did. We invite the campus community to treat it like a poster session, ask them questions, it's interactive. And then we go into a presentation portion that's about 2 hours, where it's members from across the division presenting on all of their assessment efforts, their annual reports, We highlight division partnerships. We have a partnership spectrum of level and involvement of our partners and how we classify them. And so we invite people who are true partners to present as well. That's also when we give out 1 to 2 staff awards called our Courageous Change Leader Awards, because of our strategic plan being Cultivating Courageous Change. But the whole point of that is there's a document that goes with it that's sort of an editorial version of an annual report, that somebody wants to read, as opposed to most of what we get is very data-based or research written. But it's really to highlight the fact that on our campus, student affairs has always been asked or put into a back seat. And now we are putting ourselves into the front seat and showing the impact that we have, and that the university wouldn't be as successful, our students wouldn't be as successful if it weren't for the learning opportunities and the development of our programs. And it's just solidifying our place and saying, we also educate on our campus, we also take care of, and we also advocate for our students. So it's a mixture of staff presenting, faculty, campus partners. Most of our students are gone at that point, so we have video and audio from them talking about the impact that our programs and services had on them. So it's a multimedia, live, video, hybrid presentation that we invite the entire campus to, as well as anyone who's affiliated, so employers, service partners, if any of our Board of Trustee members want to come. But the goal is to really say, here's what we do and here's how we impact our campus.
Thank you for sharing that and for your question, Abby. We are just past the top of the hour already, actually. I wanted to, to whatever extent the presenters can stay a little bit longer, and as can our participants, feel free to ask more questions, but I wanted to share a couple of things. Our next structured conversation is in the early planning stages, so stay tuned for that. But also, as we transition our SAAL leadership, to stay tuned if you have any suggestions for topics or presenters, that there is a form that you can fill out on our website to suggest that or let the professional development committee know. The other piece is, as we're talking about curriculum and competencies, our open course, Applying and Leading Assessment in Student Affairs, will be happening again this spring, starting February 24th. This is a chance for learning some of that foundational skills, especially for smaller offices. If you don't feel like you have the capacity to build curriculum, you can have staff go through this curriculum and kind of supplement that with your own campus focus and needs. We've heard anecdotally that some campuses are going through having staff go through this as a group. So that's an option too, and we'll continue to develop that. But just wanted you to be aware of that resource. For both of these, check our website. The recording will be on the SAAL website, as will the link to today's PowerPoint and resources. So we hope to continue engaging in this conversation and sharing. So thank you for your time today. Are there any other questions for people that are still here? Doesn't look like it. Rob, I'll mention there was a question about your data scientist position.
Okay.
And so I encourage the person to just follow up with you afterwards, since that's
Great.
less about developing competencies for all student affairs staff. So look for that email.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate that.
Okay, well, we will end this meeting and see you next year.
Thank you for hosting us, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thanks. It was great. It was one of the best ones I've watched or attended. So this was awesome.
And Vince, did you stop the recording?